Part of why I started this channel was because I got into the home arcade scene during the pandemic, and I was huge into all the different Arcade1Up devices and have basically built most of this channel off of that platform and reviewing those types of devices. However, one part of the Arcade1Up lineup that I don't see getting talked about as much, there are the Countercades. And in this video, I'm going to go over the Countercades and if they're worth picking up and adding to your collection, and also who they really are for when it comes to the home arcade community and people who are interested in these types of devices. So let's take a look. The Countercades are different from most small or mini arcade machines in that they're designed to mimic the authenticity of a full arcade machine, but in a smaller form factor. In a lot of ways, they kind of remind me of those bar top games that you'd see at different restaurants or bars, of course. And that's kind of what the aesthetic or size that Arcade1Up was going for with these devices. Now, when it comes to the Countercade devices overall, however, the devices have a bit of a mixed bag to them. And what I mean by that is, it seems standard across the board with the bulk of them anyways, that there's no light up marquees, there's typically only mono sound, and worst of all, I found on some of the devices, and I've only used a handful of them and only currently own two, but that the controls themselves don't feel as good as the full-size Arcade1Up units. And keep in mind, they're a mixed bag when it comes to controls as well. So out of the gate, the quality control for the Countercades is not there like they are on some of the bigger full-size Arcade1Ups and even the Partycades, which so far from the more recent generations seem to have the gold standard in every aspect of the Arcade1Up units, in my opinion. But the Countercades themselves, they're definitely not as well built. Now, the reason I bring this up is because if this is something you're going to seriously consider and seriously have at your bar top or in your home, however you choose to display them, you may find that they're just don't feel as good and you're not going to get that same level of authenticity that you might have expected from, the original arcade games. Now, of course, again, these are smaller reproductions of their bigger brothers from the arcades, but that's just something to consider. The other thing, and I brought this up in a really early review I did on this channel with the Miss Pac-Man Countercade, is really just finding space for these. Now, I've figured out some good strategic spots in my home arcade that make this work and make them playable in my home, but for a long time I didn't really have that. And to me, ideally, the Countercades would probably work best if you have like a home bar or you have a space in your home that's elevated in a way that these can be played comfortably. To me, that would make the most sense for these devices. I've actually even considered purchasing like a circular table for my basement and having my Countercades on them with some bar stools, because I think that might make them a lot more appealing for what I have going on down here. So spacing is definitely a consideration for these devices. I know in some of the marketing that you see from 1UP, people are just playing them at tables and stuff like that. My opinion is I think it would look kind of wonky or awkward having it at my coffee table right here. Just doesn't seem like it would really fit. Now, as far as the emulation goes, so far from every single device I've played, these emulate quite well. I've actually never really had much of an issue with Arcade1Up's emulation. I've had some more mixed bag things with their online, but even that they've seemed to have ironed out pretty well. But as far as the emulation goes on these devices, works very well. But to bring this back though, one thing I do want to mention that seems kind of bizarre to me is there is no wireless or online for these devices, even in their later generations, and I believe the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Countercade that I have is the latest generation, and it's only one player. To me, even if 1UP kind of increased the pricing a bit on that device and added some sort of online capability, I think it would have made the device have a massive more amount of replayability, and it would also solve a larger issue with the 1UP devices where people don't really have enough people to play with, and that would solve that sort of issue. So it's unfortunate, but you don't really see that in any of these devices, and the bulk of these, with the exception of one wave of these devices, are all one player, which is again another consideration. But if you're playing this bar top, like I expect most people might be doing, might not seem like a terrible thing, but it would be nice to have that little extra option of being able to play online, because in my opinion, what some of these retail for aren't that much cheaper than the Partycades, which to me are far superior devices. I believe the Ninja Turtles unit is around $250 for retail Canadian. So to me, that's pretty steep considering the size of the device and what you get. So it'd be nice to have seen more features out of that as well at that price point. Now, of course, these devices do go on sale. I believe I bought the Miss Pac-Man part or Countercade that I have for like $100. I'm unsure what my wife spent on the Ninja Turtles one, but they do typically go on sale, and they are in the price range of around 100 to 150 when they're on sale. However, again, they retail usually around 200 plus, so that is a consideration as well. In my opinion, I would argue the Countercades are typically for people who have a smaller space or a space that can accommodate them, like a home bar. That to me makes the most sense when it comes to those devices as far as purchasing, because that seems like, in my opinion, where they would get the most play. If you don't have that and you're like me, you might find these a little more risky to purchase for your home arcade. They look cool as far as aesthetics go, in my opinion, but you might find a little riskier to kind of have them in your home. And what I mean by that is you might just not have the proper space to accommodate it. I had to really work hard on reorganizing my whole home arcade to kind of find a good spot for these devices to make them fit with what I was going for in my basement arcade here. So overall, I would say the Countercades are definitely a mixed bag. I know some people I'm seeing in the community have done a great job of modding these devices and changing parts over to make them better and do better things, but if you're like me and you've kept almost all your units stock, you may find that these devices are lacking in a lot of ways, and they're missing some core features that I've expected or come to expect from some of the more recent releases from Arcade1Up. So overall, my opinion really stands on, if you have a space that justifies it, or a limited amount of space, or I guess if you just like the novelty of these and aren't going in with ultra high expectations, you may find these a good addition to your home arcade. Otherwise, if you don't have the space to accommodate it or the reason to even accommodate it, I'd probably skip the Countercades entirely.